Hello, hello. Welcome to the Texas Grassroots Alliance live stream. Neil, how's it going?
It's going well, Alex. How is it for you?
Going pretty good. It is Wednesday, February 21st, and we are excited to be with everyone for another week as we live stream on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube.
Oh, boy.
And once again, we are doing this as kind of an experimentation to highlight various grassroots content around the issues in Texas. And helping people understand what grassroots organizing is happening to try to improve our state.
You better believe it. And I'm here in Houston, and Alex is in Fort Worth, and we are with Texas Grassroots Alliance. Serves all of Texas, the big counties, the small counties, the big cities, the small cities, the rural areas, the medium-sized cities. And we are looking forward to growing the show and growing the Grassroots Alliance and growing our freedom.
Absolutely. We're going to have a very particular topic that we're going to be talking about today, Neil. So much is happening in Texas, so it's tough to just stay on one subject, but we're going to try our hardest to do that today as we continue to play with the format and everything.
Absolutely.
So I know you've got some great content lined up for us. You want to kick us off?
We're gonna kick us off. That's a football analogy. Baseball season starts tomorrow. I'm very, very enthused about that. And let's see here. Oh boy. All right. So we have a consistent theme of articles today. And two are from Texas Grassroots Alliance contributors, Michelle Davis and her excellent Substack that you ought subscribe to and pay her to continue to write. There we go. And then we're going to also use content from my Houston Democracy project as well. And that's also taking donations. This is work that needs to be funded. So the consistent theme today is the deportation infrastructure that is being imagined for the second Donald Trump administration, not just imagined, but concretely being constructed for a second Donald Trump administration, or that might even become a part of a red state defiance of the federal government if Joe Biden wins. And Michelle Davis and her excellent Lone Star Left Substack, and also my Houston Democracy Project, and many other folks have been focused on the base camp in Eagle Pass that Greg Abbott says he's going to build as part of his Operation Lone Star. So it's a base camp that, to Michelle's view and to many folks' view, could easily be expanded, converted, altered, adjusted, shifted in purpose to become a migrant detention camp. And so Michelle focuses on our tax dollars being tossed out down the line on this, as we should, because the people of Eagle Pass don't even want this. And we spoke about this on a previous program last week. People at Eagle Pass don't want these DPS constant Texas National Guard process. They're inhibiting use of their Shelby Park down there. But of course, local sentiment doesn't matter. So the infrastructure is being put in place. Greg Abbott, red state governors, Donald Trump, to detain migrants, and they have these plans as specific. The Stephen Miller, you remember him? He was horrible man from the Trump first term. I've seen him talk about the schedule of flights. We're going to have this many flights a day, and this infrastructure of a detention camp should concern everyone on a variety of levels. This is something that can be expanded to any opponent or any unliked person or class of persons of an authoritarian regime. Michelle says several weeks ago, Trump vowed to be dictator on day one of election. Plans on first day of new administration to invoke Insurrection Act to dispatch military to counter demonstrations. You remember him waving the Bible. He wanted to use the DC police. And so that's Michelle. That's a lot of what Michelle is saying. What's your thought on that, Alex?
I think one of the big things that come out of this article is showing how Abbott's work in Texas and what Trump is hoping to accomplish if he's elected to the second term are very much in sync, like what you're sharing. Like these are not things happening independently, and folks, don't know what's going on. When it comes to the far right extremism of the Republican Party right now, their plans are developed years in advance, and they have plans years from now. And the actions that they're taking are not spontaneous. They're not reacting to the moment. In fact, what they do a lot of times is they're wanting to either utilize something that's happening in the world as a reason to implement a part of their plan. And if that's not happening, then they'll manufacture something. And I think Operation Lone Star, we've seen with the billions of dollars wasted around that, ultimately create the political theater that allows Abbott to continue to try to justify now this military base. And when you connect to hearing what Trump's former administration folks and Trump himself are talking about, you see that the lines are connected, and the dots are connected very clearly in terms of what they want to do if they are successful in getting reelected, being in power, and having, the decision-making power.
Right. So quick. Right. So that made me think of three quick things. You say manufacture something. Right. The Reichstag fire in Nazi Germany, or the sinking of the Maine. That was remember the Maine that was exploited by the publisher Hearst to start the Spanish-American War. But it's also important to remember that this is elected officials all up and down the Republican line. If your local official has endorsed Trump, this could be your dog catcher, your water monitor. It doesn't matter if they've endorsed Trump or if they've been silent. Silence about extremism is extremism. They're involved in this. And then it's not just the capacity. Lastly, for a Trump administration to enact all this stuff, it's red state governors who, if Biden wins, and we're seeing this, acting on their own, hoping the court will ratify it, or daring a court to undo it, or daring the federal government to come in. And that very much is like a Jim Crow type of strategy. It's right in front of us.
Yeah, and I think that's just the important thing for folks to understand here is that in Texas, we're having all of this chaos, put on us with all these different issues that we're trying to fight. But when it comes to immigration, there's a very clear goal and purpose that they're after. And we're going to play a clip here in a little bit that Michelle highlights in her article from PBS that talks a little bit about some of the things that have already been shared in terms of what they hope. But Neil, when you talk about local government and you talk about representation down the line, right now we're seeing the governor try to weaponize the Texas National Guard. And that has created a standoff with the federal border
and
patrol.
DPS.
All right. So he's already and DPS. And so he weaponizes DPS and Texas National Guard against federal border patrol. That right now a Democratic president is in place to cause that tension. But if a Republican president is in place, we can assume there would be no tension at that point. So those are major components of law enforcement in our country. But then when you look at municipalities, which you focus on a lot, and you see the interactions with local police, and you see the extremism when it comes to police unions that are parroting these far right talking points, this is what you're talking about understanding any elected official that's not pushing back on this, that they are making us vulnerable because they want to have all of these law enforcement components, locked in step with whatever they decide they want.
Right. It's insidious. So you have the police unions who do not step back from election deniers and insurrectionists. It's one thing to endorse Greg Abbott or Dan Patrick. That's wrong action. But when you become clear that they're talking about overturning elections or defying federal authority, that's when you say, you know what, hey, we endorsed you for your policies, but that's too far. We're not going to do that. So they have that capacity every day to step back from it. And I think it's also important to remember that individual police officers retain their identity, and not every police officer is on board with it. I think that's also important to remember, because we don't know how battle lines will be drawn. We don't know who will follow what order. I'm part of a weekly protest at Senator Cornyn's office in Houston, and we've had officers go by, they give you a thumbs up, and you take anything an officer does with a grain of salt. But these officers retain autonomy. They're not all Republicans or Democrats. So there's some value to making a distinction between the police union and the police without being naive. But then even if you had a mayor who was willing to say, you know what, we're not letting DPS or the Texas National Guard come in to quell First Amendment protected demonstrations, that's contingent on the governor not taking state control of that police force, and that's contingent on being able to hold the police force under municipal authority. And these are questions we just need really to begin to consider. And I'll use it when and they're hard to consider. We think about this as other countries. We have comfortable lives. I have a comfortable life. You don't want to think about this. I watched the public comment of our Houston City Council, and we have a new Republican elected council member named Julian Ramirez. And we had lawsuits here to overturn elections. He had lost a judicial seat 2 years ago. He didn't join the lawsuit. He told me, he said, I didn't join this lawsuit because I thought there was nothing. So you think, oh, he's sane. I'm watching council yesterday, and there were advocates for good environmental measures around the Port of Houston, because there's a new board seat coming up. And there's a nice woman speaking, and she's from the Ship Channel area, and her time runs out. And Mr. Ramirez says, oh no, take my time. And you're sitting there watching, you're thinking, oh, he's okay. But he doesn't distance himself from Trump. He doesn't say that it's wrong for Greg Abbott to say we should shoot migrants. He doesn't say he's supporting a candidate for sheriff, Mike Knox, who testified in front of Senator Betancourt last year that people were getting water in line at the vote. The same old crap. So you want to believe that Mr. Ramirez is and maybe in a previous era, Mr. Ramirez would just be an unremarkable Republican and go along, get along, whatever. But we need to be able to ask these questions, and we need to not normalize people as much as they try to normalize themselves. And he may be an internal conflict himself. I wouldn't rule that out. But would you bet much on him being brave at an authoritarian moment? No, I wouldn't bet much. Certainly me and my house's freedom.
I think that's so important, Neil, that this is not normal, what we're in. And folks need to recognize we are in 2024. And if you're of a certain age and you grew up in the 90s, or you grew up in the beginning of the 2000s, in the aught years, a lot has changed in our country. A lot of things have happened. A lot of, we've gone through wars. We've gone through, financial collapses. We've gone through pandemics. We've gone through an extreme presidency. We are on the other side of a lot of things that have happened through our lifetimes over the last 20 or 30 years. So if anyone is in positions of power and are elected officials or have influence, and they've had that influence for the last 10, 20, 30 years, it's important for us to have these conversations to challenge them, because what we're living in today in 2024 is not the same. What is being organized by the governor of Texas, what is being proposed by a presidential candidate, what is being amplified by other far-right governors and Republicans in our country is not normal. And we need to recognize of the threat that we're under right now with what they hope to try to accomplish. And I think with that, Neil, you want to make another point? I'm going to play that video so folks can kind of
I
see.
just want to, there is a chat. You're on Facebook. You're on Twitter. There is a chat, and feel free to add a comment, and we'd love to have it.
Absolutely. We're going to play this clip, and then we'll come back with our next article after this.
On the campaign trail this weekend, former President Donald Trump made clear that if elected again, he'd pursue more extreme immigration policies, including mass deportations of millions of people.
On day one, I will terminate every open border policy of the Biden administration, and we will begin the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. We have no choice.
To break down the potential impact of Trump's agenda, Laura Barone-Lopez joins us now. So, Laura, what has the former president laid out in terms of his immigration plan if he were to win this year?
So, Amna, that mass deportation plan that Trump has talked about, including this weekend, we know some details of how it would be carried out from Stephen Miller, the architect of Trump's first-term immigration policies, who remains a close ally and advisor to the president. Stephen Miller talked about how they would carry out that type of deportation plan to right-wing personality Charlie Kirk last fall.
Then in terms of personnel, you go to the red state governors and you say, give us your National Guard. We will deputize them as immigration enforcement officers. The Alabama National Guard is going to arrest illegal aliens in Alabama, and the Virginia National Guard in Virginia. And if you're going to go into an unfriendly state like Maryland, well, then it would just be Virginia doing the arrest in Maryland, right? Very close, very nearby.
So there, Stephen Miller is talking about how they would federalize the National Guard to carry out the mass deportation plan. Through comments from Stephen Miller, through comments from the former president himself, reports as well as aligned policy groups, we have a picture of the type of immigration policies that the former president would implement if he were to win a second term. And so the list that we have is not an exhaustive list, but it includes building large-scale camps near the southern border, a renewed Muslim travel ban, the end of birthright citizenship for U.S.-born children of undocumented immigrants, and creating a federalized army of red state National Guards, like Stephen Miller referenced.
Is that legally possible, even federalizing red state National Guard?
So technically, yes, it is. I spoke to Joseph Nunn. He is from the Brennan Center for Justice, and he is a legal expert on U.S. military activities domestically. And he said that this is legally possible for the president to do.
Donald Trump's proposal to send the National Guard from red states into blue states in order to enforce this deportation program could only be accomplished through invoking the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act makes the president the sole judge of whether a given situation warrants invoking the act. In other words, an insurrection is whatever the president says is an insurrection. That's why it's so important for Congress to reform the Insurrection Act, to put in place safeguards against abuse, because as things stand, there are quite literally no guardrails.
So as Joseph Nunn said there, former President Trump has pretty wide authority to institute the Insurrection Act in order to federalize National Guards and be able to send them into other states to round up migrants. And the last time, Amna, that the Insurrection Act was invoked was 1992. It's rarely used. And before that, the only time it was ever invoked over the objection of states and state leaders was in the 1960s.
Laura, what would something like that mean for the military?
Joseph Nunn of the Brennan Center told me that to even do something like that, you would have to have wide mobilization, large-scale mobilization of military, of the National Guard, and it would require these members of the military who have other duties, mind you, and the National Guard is key in helping with duties abroad, that they would then be taken away from that in order to carry this out. I also spoke to a former commissioner of Customs and Border Protection who said that National Guard are not trained in the way that border agents, in the way that ICE agents are trained to be able to tell what people's status are, whether someone can be detained. And they are trained, ICE and Border Patrol agents, in the civil and criminal laws that enable them to carry out immigration law. And that's not something that National Guard is prepared for.
Well, that puts it all together quite a bit, Neil.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think having that bulleted outline of what a potential Trump administration wants to pursue is something that people really need to start to understand. And I think a part of maybe our, I don't know, optimism, I guess, if you want to say, is that even if Trump's in office, the amount of incompetence will be, on another level, because we saw incompetence in the last administration. And while, there's a lot of jokes about Trump and there's a lot of jokes about his administration, folks are quick to forget the harm that his administration did in multiple areas, including his appointment of Supreme Court justices that we are really struggling against right now, as well as the fact that they had an insurrection to try to stop the transfer of power. So we should not take this lightly in the slightest.
Yeah, no, they've got to. They're not. They are committed to not being incompetent, and they are not dumb. We are not smarter than them. This is a moment. This is the moment they've been waiting for, where they're going after. Amazon is saying that the National Labor Relations Board is illegitimate. They are going after everything. They are going after a Western order of things, which I understand all of its flaws. But to hew to the subject at hand, this it's not just migrants. It'll be demonstrations. It will be their perception of crime. And we see how, the tough on crime crew here in Houston that's always going on about the judges, they never go on about restrictions on voting rights. They don't go on about January 6th. They don't go on about Trump announces that I'll use the Insurrection Act or suspend civil liberties. They don't go on about Ken Paxton's lawlessness. And then also you've heard Trump say things about homelessness, encampments. So this is homelessness. This is their conception of crime. This is civil demonstrations, and it is migrants, and that is not far away from just people they don't like. They don't like, and you think it won't impact you, and maybe you'll stay home, maybe, but it sure will leave a lousy future for your kids. And it sure will inhibit any conception of the way you want it to live, and it will also screw up climate action. The whole boatload. But this focus on civil liberties is immediate and right here.
Absolutely. Well, I heard you mention our FBI indicted Attorney General. I think our next article highlights him a little bit and what he's trying to do on this front.
Right. So this is from a Fox television affiliate, and sometimes these Fox affiliates do good work in the in local markets. So in El Paso, the Attorney General Paxton is seeking to shut down Annunciation House, an El Paso Catholic nonprofit that's provided shelter and other services to migrants and immigrants for decades. I was not aware of this place before the recent discussion of this issue, but apparently it's been in the community for a long time, and it's affiliated with the Catholic Church. It would be great to see the church more active on a whole range of these issues. They certainly feel free to speak about abortion issues. You'll hear them talk about death penalty issues sometimes. And that we sure could use the church right here. And this is a church affiliated operation. Here's the person who runs it with a quote: "The church is at risk because the volunteers are asking themselves, if I feed someone who's unprocessed, if I give someone a blanket who's unprocessed, if I help them get off the street, am I liable to be prosecuted for that?" Think about how kindred that is to these rules about driving voters to the polls. A ride share to vote is a Texas Grassroots Alliance member. And there are, we've had conversations. They want to criminalize taking a certain number of voters to the polls. So they're criminalizing the most simple acts, taking someone to the polls, giving a child a book that might have a sexual reference, giving a cold person a blanket. And they're criminalizing kindness. They're criminalizing civic participation. They're criminalizing our conception of life and how it ought be. And all this stuff is connected. Annunciation House, this is a quote, kept hundreds of thousands of refugees coming through our city off the streets and given them food. So they have not invited these folks in. These are folks here, probably many of them with valid asylum claims or working within the legal structures of our immigration, keeps people off the streets, gives them shelter while they come through our community. If the work that Annunciation House conducts is illegal, so too is the work of our local hospitals, schools, and food banks. So what the AG Abbott wants to do is make these folks no longer able to operate and criminalize what they do, no different from Planned Parenthood, no different from women's health clinics, libraries, voting, assisting the homeless in certain areas. So the criminalization of just decency.
Yeah, it's tough for a lot of folks, I think, to understand like what is the purpose, because it is so against how we think about serving our communities. And I think, when we hear from grassroots organizers who are working in communities either on the border or in Latino majority communities like El Paso, we've heard things from grassroots organizers that talk about, here comes some Trumper in a truck starting to cuss out some woman who's speaking Spanish, who, is simply just going about her day trying to get gas in her car or do something else. And it's someone in the community stepping in to try to stop that because of this normalized harassment that people think is acceptable. And there's these kind of stories we're hearing from grassroots organizers as they're trying to build community, trying to help folks see that the opportunity is to get engaged in this, to fight back through education, fight back through participation, fight back through voting, so that we can start to eliminate these threats versus them continuing to grow and worsen each year. So I think seeing this article, it's you can feel the despair in people not knowing, what do we do then? How do we do? What can we do? And these are just the type of questions when it comes to, like you said, Neil, kindness, serving the community. A lot of times grassroots organizers get perceived as just organizing, knocking on doors, telling people to vote. Grassroots organizing does a whole spectrum of work. It's mutual aid work, it's advocacy, it's activism, and it's electoral organizing. But grassroots organizers are in the community, serving their community day in and day out, working to meet the needs of their community and to try to solve the problems that they are hearing and a lot of times experiencing themselves. And so I think this is where this year is so critical for folks, and it being a major election year, presidential election year, for people not to tune out, but to actually start to catch up with what's going on, because we are in a year that will fundamentally change our country in a very negative way if we're not careful.
Yeah. And our elected officials need to. It's different. I'm no expert on undocumented status. I'm no expert on people's living arrangements, or connection that families have to individuals who may be undocumented. I don't think it's uncommon here in Houston and in other parts of the state for folks to have family that is undocumented. And one of the things they want to, because my family, we just came and cut down the trees 400 years ago, right? We came to Massachusetts and just, hey, here we are, right? So I had that privilege. But so now, and what you're seeing, and I think this is in Florida, that the transportation of an undocumented person becomes a felony, right? So just think about that. You took them to the supermarket, right? You took them to the post office. You've transported them, right? And they use this language that's kindred to, fugitive slave laws. You transported this person. And it criminalizes the person. Oh, this is some bad person. This is an escaped person. And it's incredible to me that our elected officials aren't talking about this. Two, I frequently will focus on our Senator Carol Alvarado, Representative Armando Wally. It's important that we name names. Marianne Perez, State Representative. Although the obligation is on all, it's not just on Latino state reps, it's on all of this is connected. So the obligation is on Ann Johnson, John Rosenthal, Alma Allen, Sinfronia Thompson. I'm just listing Senator Boris Miles. I'm just listing our own Houston area Democrats. This is a tremendous disruption, and a traffic stop can become a deportation event. And we have to demand that our elected officials talk about it. They could have town halls. I wish that our elected officials would have democracy town halls where we talk about voting and the potential implications. And I continue to stress this to our electeds, because when we act on our own, it doesn't get funded. When we protest on our own, it's over policed. When we tell folks, hey, okay, then are you spending every moment you can trying to get out the vote to defeat an authoritarian like Ted Cruz, to defeat Donald Trump in Texas, which we have to maintain the optimism can be done? They're not doing that either. Everything you do, and you get marginalized just trying to get your own systems, that you have your own internal wariness to act in the way that they're just supposed to. And it's like it's a heavy lift to get the state reps who say, hey, trust the mainstream system, trust my bipartisan arrangement with so-and-so. Like, okay, I'll trust that. Would you just act out just the realization of what you've just told me? No.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, we had bipartisan legislation that the U.S. Congress was working to pass, that the House of Representatives said was dead on arrival because Trump told them not to pass it. And recently in an interview, he said it would have made the other side look good. And that's not what he wanted. So they don't actually want to solve this. They want to politicize it for power. And then they want to put solutions in place that, like you said, demonize the person, demonize supporting community members and things like that. And so I think what's frustrating is that we see the extremism is coming from the far right, and we see the extremism is foundation is in the Republican Party. Now, there may be some Republican elected officials that are trying to fight this, similar to what we saw Republicans fighting vouchers that Abbott's trying to pass in the Texas legislature, right? But they're not being nearly vocal enough. If there are any. The other problem you have is that you have Democrats who are trying to find agreement with this far right faction and are using it as an opportunity to score political points to either criticize Biden, like we saw with Colin Allred by joining a resolution that was based on their talking points, as well as I think 12 other Democratic Congress folks. And then you also see in other issues this leaking out to where some representatives and some elected officials in Texas, whether municipal or state legislature, are trying to cozy up to Republicans' money, power, and perspectives. And so within the Democratic Party, there has to be challenges as well, because not everyone is on the side of wanting to solve this in a real, humane, reformed way, because there are reforms that are needed. There is legislation that needs to be passed. There are solutions that we need to implement. But what is being proposed and what is being put out there with Trump's deportation and immigration reform is something that is not what our country should be about. And so when Democrats are not able to have the courage or the backbone, or are only focused on their own self-interest, and they simply are going to change parties, which we've already seen some Democrats change parties in South Texas. We hear
And
that in Dallas, and there may be more that come around this year, depending on how the election goes. These are not people who are committed to the values to try to have an inclusive, equitable, safe, just world. They are simply grifters trying to have power and money to be able to help their bottom line versus serve the people. And we need to be able to name these people, like you said, and we need to be able to challenge them so that they are no longer in these positions, and we actually put people in place that will represent the values that the majority have.
Right. I agree. And the reason we'll move to the next article, but the reason I frequently focus on Carol Alvarado and Armando Wally, Marianne Perez, State Rep Ana Hernandez, is that they were aggressive in their support of John Whitmire for mayor of Houston. And Mayor Whitmire intends to bring in DPS troops, politicized Greg Abbott police troops to Houston, theoretically just to police our streets. And they keep telling us, you know what, SB4 is going to be thrown out. SB4, the bill that turns, the state bill that turns traffic stops into potential deportations. Hey, it's going to be thrown out. But there's no, they're trying to get it to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court will, hey, Roe v. Wade, they won't bring it down. Hey, Obamacare, no, it's safe, right? And it survives 5-4, and they cut out a big chunk of it. There's no reason to believe SB4 in the end. Then they'll say SB4 can't be implemented. Well, sure, it can be implemented. If they want to put that they're implementing everything in Eagle Pass, they're building a base. And then if it isn't if it's not implemented, then we have the federal administration coming in, potentially, of Trump. And then if that doesn't happen, Greg Abbott and Ken Paxton remain, and with an emboldened red state government in a second Biden term. How do you think they're going to act with an 83-year-old Biden or Vice President Harris, whom they hate just because of her identity? They're not going to do that. So that's why I'm focusing on some of these specific state legislators here in the Houston area. You are the ones who are saying it's okay to bring in DPS. And you want to live in a fantasy land where these problems go away without anything substantively changing, and that's not what's coming down the pike. And they'll be fine and safe, and average folks of all types, not just migrants, but anyone with differing viewpoints, will not be fine and safe.
Well, while we transition to our next article, we want to remind everyone that you can support the Texas Grassroots Alliance by donating. There's a QR code that you can scan that helps support grassroots organizing, helps support collaborations like this, and so many more, so that we can continue to do the work of connecting with community members, building collective power, and changing the direction of our communities, our state, and our country. So donate today to the Texas Grassroots Alliance and help continue to support the work that you're seeing, like from Neil's Houston Democracy Project, like Michelle's Lone Star Left, and so many other efforts that are being done throughout the state.
Right. Absolutely. And also the Texas Democracy Project is very much taking donations. This is my post on the matter that we're talking about. I don't think that I think we've covered it. And I bring in the municipal angle. Mayor Whitmire wants to bring DPS troops to Houston streets. And remember now, Dallas has a Republican mayor. Remember that in Austin, Mayor Watson had DPS patrolling the street. He said, "Hey, would you go?" Because they were disproportionately arresting Latino folks. They wouldn't go. It took 2 or 3 requests and wrangling to get them out. And they're still talking about creating a separate capital district policed by the state around the area of the State House. So this issue is very relevant to any Texas city. And it continues to escalate to where you saw Stephen Miller in the clip we showed, the PBS clip, talk about troops from Virginia going into Maryland or Baltimore. Well, you know, New York City or Philadelphia isn't far. They've got a plan for all of it, and you cannot count on their incompetence. And for all their theoretical incompetence last term, they did a hell of a lot of damage, and came reasonably close to overturning their election, overturning their defeat. So the Houston Democracy Project is my effort, and there's a daily blog there and a front page, a change.org petition you can sign to commit to showing up no matter what happens in 2024 and into 2025. And I encourage you to look at it, donate, comment, share it with others. And it's a great Texas Grassroots Alliance effort.
Yeah, I think what's key, Neil, is the work that you're doing that's focused on a lot of the municipal level issues, is that we see an opportunity of connecting what municipal government is doing, as you've highlighted in this article, to what the governor is doing, and then ultimately what a potential president wants to do. And for it to be streamlined for folks to see an issue like immigration to be streamlined from a president's administration to the state leadership and governor to the mayor of one of the largest cities in the country, as well as the largest city in Texas. This is deeply affecting millions and millions of people just with that through line, and people not understanding how local government is unfortunately being coordinated in very extreme ways. And so your article highlighting that I think is what's so key for people to be able to digest and really understand. And
your county judge in Tarrant County.
My county judge in Tarrant County, the horrible county judge, Tim O'Hare, who has received over $87,000 from a political PAC that collaborates with Nazi sympathizers and no Nazis.
Right.
That also in that strategy session that Nick Fuentes came to Fort Worth, Texas, to talk to the formerly known Defend Texas Liberty PAC. I think they changed their name. I don't have it in front of me right now, but that former state rep Jonathan Stickland was running. There was also an extreme organization around the border that was at that strategy session as well. And Tim O'Hare has taken over $87,000 from that PAC, continues to, is going to be willing to accept more funds. And it's every level of government that they are coordinating this at.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
then police unions. They have a militarized force, the National Guard, PPS.
Yep. And in Tarrant County, we also have the 287G program that allows the, county and the sheriff to coordinate with ICE. So that piece is already in place. And so every community is going to be impacted. We focused on El Paso here. We focused on Eagle Pass and the border. But you being in Houston, me being in Fort Worth, none of us are untouched from this pursuit of an extreme policy when it comes to immigration and how they are wanting to handle it.
Correct. And again, it's connected. It's not just immigration they're talking about. It's stopping women at the border, state borders to New Mexico or Colorado who might want an abortion or whatever. Who knows? You see counties with freeways in them or roads of access to New Mexico, criminalizing going through their communities. If you're seeking medical care, you're seeing librarians. In Katy ISD, which is a big district here, librarians now have to read the book before they buy it. So just think about that. The librarian, when are they supposed to do that? So basically what that means, and how would you interpret it? You buy a book about President Obama and it says gay marriage was legalized during his term. Would you buy the book? So it's helping migrants, it's teachers, it's what you can teach, it's medical care for pregnant women, it's driving voters to the polls, it's transporting, it's driving. The act of driving your aunt to the post office becomes transporting, right? There's a whole terminology.
Yep.
Right? You're doing something, you're taking Aunt so and so, to the supermarket, and you have a flat, and a cop comes, and so this is a authoritarian restructuring of our lives, and we think it's not possible. But the Civil Rights Act was only signed 59 years ago. The New Deal is only 91 years old, the inauguration of Roosevelt. So to our mind, these things are permanent, but the way that the right looks at it is, we didn't have this before 1865, or we didn't have an income tax before 1915, or we didn't have the New Deal before the 30s, or we had, brutal repression of black folks and Mexicans and repression of gays, and women couldn't get a credit card up to the 60s. Maybe that's the national order of things. That's the rationales they're offering.
And you see it. They already have plans. They're announcing it publicly. They want to get rid of birth control. They want to get rid of no-fault divorce. They want to get rid of, talking about librarians, there's an extreme ISD that was, there's an ISD that was taken over by extremists. Sorry. Is it Spring Hill ISD that will not have librarians next year? They're getting rid of the position.
Oh, Spring Branch. Spring Branch? Is that what Spring Branch?
Is it Spring Branch? Yeah, Spring Branch ISD.
That's in Harris County, yeah.
Yeah, so it is connected. All of this is connected. We're focusing on immigration and the border today, but make no mistake, everything that they're doing is connected to their book bans, to anti-LGBTQ legislation, to their view on health cares and not wanting to expand Medicaid, to more and more and more all across the board. And that's why, we highlighted last week the Poor People's Campaign that is trying to help mobilize poor low-income workers, which is a third of the electorate in Texas, to see there's a whole slate of things we can improve. And we'll talk about that more in another broadcast, but they are coordinated in all the things that they're wanting to do for sure.
So to wrap it up, this is just a political newswire I read that's just a summation of articles, Tegan Goddard's Political Wire, and it's a Washington Post story, which is behind a paywall. Trump and allies plot militarized mass deportations. Trump pledges as president, he'd immediately launch largest domestic deportation operation in America history. He's modeling it on something done under President Eisenhower that used a bad slur to describe people. And the operation describes military tactics to round up and remove migrants. There's not enough space to put the migrants. And the Trump advisor Miller says they would address by building mass deportation camps. So that takes us back to what Michelle said at the beginning, what I said, that base down there in Eagle Pass is a deportation camp in the waiting. And I've read elsewhere that as odious as some of the Eisenhower stuff was, so I'm not minimizing it, that undocumented persons are more integrated into life, American life today, And we have a whole set of civil rights expectations and rights that we have won since the Eisenhower administration. And why don't, if they want to do that, why don't they round up the business places that hire the undocumented persons, or properly prosecute them? It's always the most easiest person. That's because the issue is racial purification, racial cleansing. That's what this is all about. A vision of a white country, getting these folks out. And then when they talk about the end of birthright citizenship, which to my understanding, I mean, it's in the Constitution. If you're born here, you're a citizen. So they keep saying, well, we're just going to get rid of it. And maybe they'll find a Supreme Court ruling to do it. But then just imagine, and then it's not a far step from revoking citizenship. I mean, things like that happen. You thought you were an American, and hey, if you're under 25 or whatever the terms are, you read accounts of Europe and World War I, World War II, people, and I'm sure my understanding of history is, I'm sure, drastically incomplete. It is people lose citizenship, people lose their status, people lose, and by losing your rights, you're losing your conception of whom you are. And that's another component. So, but that Washington Post article, which ran today, I think sums up neatly the what we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's the ultimate goal, that people need to really understand that this white Christo-fascist Christian nationalism that is being pushed through these policies and through this far-right movement, and why we're seeing Nazis show up in the streets of various towns across our country, including various cities and communities in Texas, is centered around trying to have the diversity in our country only able to occupy a certain space, and that's in controlled labor, which, we got rid of slavery, but they want to have as close to slavery as they can, and why the private prison system is so abhorrent, and the labor that's utilized from prisons, how they are able to leverage migrant labor without actually having to, give them access to citizenship, pathway to citizenship, or being able to, have them be able to move into a better life. They essentially want to be able to look at the diverse communities in this country, benefit as much as they can for themselves as white Christian nationalists, and make sure that no benefits are given to these folks. And so we've seen the immense amount of income inequality already be a part of our country for decades. Worker wages are stagnant. A minimum wage is $7.25 still. And that's exactly what they want. In fact, they want to reduce it even more if they could. So this is extreme. Once again, as we've said, this is not normal, and people need to really understand this year. Their participation, their engagement, their understanding, the education around this is important, and their vote is very, very important. Early voting has started in the primaries. Republicans and Democrats are choosing their candidates that they want to have on the November ballot. Be sure to participate in early voting, and in the primary election that's going to be March 5th. If you can't make it through early voting, start participating now, because we're going to need you come November. Yeah.
And then actually, I'll end up my portion here just saying, your comment about Nazis marching. There was just Nazis marching in Nashville, Tennessee. There was a big group. And I want to highlight that because I focus on cities often and the role of cities in. So Nashville is a Democratic city. They had a significant crew of Nazis just marching on through town near the Tennessee State House. the Tennessee legislature recently changed how the Nashville-Davidson, that's Davidson County, they have a joint city-county council, how they do their representation, because they didn't like the way that Nashville-Davidson, and then Nashville has just lost. It had a Democratic congressman, and it's lost that Democratic congressman through gerrymandering. So folks in Nashville, they want to live the way they want to live, and this fully likens the efforts to undo elections in our cities, the capacity of right-wing people to march through our cities, and the consistent attacks on our laws. Hey, you got homeless. Hey, you got migrants. Hey, you got criminals. We got to come in, and on the way, you know, boy, your kid's reading a book, you know, with some smut in it. So let's get your librarian. It's all connected, and there's no refuge in your city. There's no refuge in your city in a red state. But we want to end it with hope. You just have to continue. You have to continue. So support grassroots organizers, support yourself, support your own self-defense, action, mental health, and that of your family, and support each other.
Absolutely. Feel free to donate today. We're excited to have your support. We're excited to continue to build out this programming. And thanks so much, Neil, for highlighting these articles and helping everyone see the through line that is happening from local government to state government to national government.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you. We'll be back tomorrow.